Lawyers of Reddit. What is the most outrageous case someone has asked you to take? Story 1. Client wants to sue Canada for denying entry due to felony record. A year out of law school, I once had a potential client who wanted me to sue Canada. Apparently, he could not get into the country due to his felony record. I tried to reason with him that it was up to the sovereign nation to set its own rules regarding entry to the country, but he insisted that we could make a lot of money suing Canada. I didn't take the case, but I told him I might be able to get him a letter that said, "Sorry, from Canada." I dictated this on my phone as I was getting coffee. Thank God for the grammar people on Reddit for saving me from this catastrophic mistake in life. Story 2. Defending a man caught on camera stealing magic cards. As a public defender, I defended a grown man accused of stealing magic cards from Walmart. There was an hour-long security video meticulously showing, from dozens of angles, that he was picking up sets of cards, unwrapping them, and discarding the wrappers around the store. He insisted that he was innocent, and we actually went to a jury trial instead of securing a plea deal. It took the jury 8 minutes to convict him, and the judge laid into my client telling him that he was the worst thief he had ever seen. I forgot the best part. At one point in the trial, I had to spend 45 minutes explaining to the judge what magic cards are. He couldn't understand why anyone need more than one deck. Story 3. Custody dispute over child's eyeglasses. Family law attorney here. I just had a custody case go back to court over eyeglasses. My client didn't like the glasses her ex bought the kid. So stupid. I want to go back to criminal defense. Gang homicide cases had nicer people to deal with than family law. Story 4. Client wants to sue uncle for harming him. I had a potential client come in and say that he wanted to sue his uncle for causing him harm. Setting aside the fact that you can't sue someone for that, I asked him who did his uncle harm. He replied, "Me." I turned the case down. Story 5. Discrimination claims for sugar addiction and therapy rabbit. While working at a plaintiff's employment firm, 2 memorable consults came in one. Guy gets fired for being late too much, wants to sue for discrimination because he has a sugar addiction, and needs to stop at 7-Eleven for a big gulp before his shift begins. As a result, he usually ends up missing the bus. 2. A woman comes in. She was a bus driver and was terminated during her probationary period. She had 3 accidents in 6 weeks. She wants to sue for discrimination because she has anxiety and a therapy rabbit, all the while sitting at the conference room table petting the therapy bunny. Story 6. Evicting a ghost and other wild requests. There's a lot of them. I've been asked to evict a ghost. I actually did that one. I regularly get phone calls promising to make me a millionaire if I'll sue the police. There's the completely guilty offender sitting in jail who wanted me to handle his appeal under circumstances that would have resulted in him being released, then immediately charged and convicted of a more serious crime. So many. Story 7. Client wants to copyright using 7 flags on stage. Second most outrageous case was a potential client wanted to protect, copyright, maybe patent, a Wii intimacy game that used the Wii controller and Wii Fit. I wanted to take it but was voted down by the firm. When I told the inventor this, he said, in a resigned voice, "Third time that's happened." I really felt bad for that inventor, but put him on to another of my friends who was a solo intellectual property lawyer. Some people are confused about the 7 flags thing, and upon review I can understand. The potential client claimed he had copyrighted the use of 7 flags on the stage for presentations. This is ridiculous, and would never have been allowed a registration. But he didn't know that. Likely the potential client was under the influence, or a scammer. My guess is he wanted to file a lawsuit, then sit down in a boardroom during pretrial motions and try to settle for a nominal sum. Story 8. 3-way custody battle involving substances, escort, and illegal images. First case out of law school. 3-way custody battle between a dad who was in and out of jail on substance charges, a mom who worked in the adult entertainment industry, and a grandfather who had a library of illegal images on his phone. our client. Mom was also paying her lawyer by trading services. Mom ended up winning custody, on the condition she stop her work in the adult entertainment industry. Story 9. Defending the donkey lover caught multiple times. Late to the party, but I have two, both I will admit are friends, rather than myself. The first case is the case of the man who was inappropriate with a donkey. A friend had to try and defend a man who got caught 3 times, engaging in inappropriate acts with a donkey on a local farm. The guy kept on getting caught because he had to take a stepladder with him, and every time it happened the farmer spotted the ladder bouncing up and down behind the fence every time the guy walked to the barn. The barrister in this case had defended members of a known paramilitary group in the past, and his words were, "A darn long step away from them, but the same amount of money." The defendant didn't have a case and was completely open about his actions in open court, no shame whatsoever supposedly. Story 10. Suing counsel for tripping over own cat. I am a personal injury lawyer in the United Kingdom. I took a call from a potential client that had fallen down the stairs in her own home. She had tripped over her own cat. She told me that she wanted to sue her local authority, as her home was owned by the council and she was not allowed to keep pets as part of her lease. She claimed that when the house was inspected, she was not told to get rid of the cat. It was therefore the council's fault that she fell down the stairs. We didn't take the case on. Story 11. Lawyer asked to sue knife manufacturer after wife cuts off husband's hand. A woman had cut off her husband's hand maliciously and was facing time and a divorce. She wanted me to help her sue the knife manufacturer for damages. Walking to work at the moment, I could probably let you know a few more if you are interested. Source work in law firm in Cleveland, Ohio. Story 12. Lawyer handles case of man wanting to produce adult and animal films. Many years ago when I was still a trainee solicitor, my then mentor wanted me to see a client on his behalf. He didn't give me any details other than he was a new client, and I was to take initial instructions, criminal law by the way. So there I am, keen but wet behind the ears, when this very large man comes into my small office and starts to inquire about the legal age of consent, 16 in my country. He then tells me the reason is he wants to start producing adult films and wants to be sure about the law. Well, then that changes the answer, as it is a different question, 18 in my country. He gets upset and animated, saying how he wanted to produce films that had much younger people in it. I explained the legal implications of this and how he would find himself in jail in very little time. He then goes on to his next idea, which is he wants to produce films for animals, not inappropriate ones or anything like that, videos of 2 animals being together, and he wants to retail it to domestic pets. At this point, my mentor had overheard some, if not all, of the consultation. Without saying a word, he walks into my office. Up to my desk. I kept a picture of my family dog on my desk. He takes the picture of my dog off my desk and leaves the room. It was the strangest consultation I have ever had to this day. Story 13. Lawyer deals with client, claiming a famous author, forced marriage contract. Story time. I had a bar referral call my office one day, and it was a nice woman who was almost in tears. Once I calmed her down and was able to ask her how I could help. She explained to me that someone had emptied her bank account and forced her to sign a contract, saying that she would marry a stranger. I was beyond confused, but being a young attorney and wanting to help, I decided to get more detail from her. I asked for more information, and what followed was one of the most bizarre things I've ever heard. So this woman claimed to be a famous author's girlfriend. You know, the guy that wrote popular romance novels? Well, she is going on and on about how they're in love, and how she was going to go to a convention being held in his honor with him. Supposedly, she wasn't able to be his date, however, because he had to be single and appear desirable to other women. In order to preserve the illusion that he was single, she reached out to a matchmaking company to get a date for the convention. She signed some paperwork with them and said she gave them her credit card. When she got home, she read the paperwork and realized that she had signed up to marry a stranger for $10,000, and that the author was going to be so mad at her. I began to realize during the course of the conversation that something was likely wrong with this woman's mental health, and I mean that in the most respectful way I can say it. She couldn't stay on a single train of thought. She kept making numerous outrageous claims about herself and her life, and the thoughts she did complete were riddled with inconsistencies. Here are a few choice selections. 1. The famous author wrote a book about her and her husband, and that was how they met. She claimed he died in the war, which isn't how the story even goes. Later, she said she wasn't and never had been married. 2. She claimed that her father had programmed the first computer in Ohio in the 60s, and that she had written the language for him. He took all the credit because he was an adult, and nobody would take her seriously at her age. 3. That the internet used to be able to teach you anything back in the day, including martial arts, psychology, and the future. Story 14. Client confesses to robbery unprompted, undermining defense. My client gave a textbook perfect confession to a robbery the police had no leads on. He had walked into the police station and told the front desk that he thought the cops were looking for him. He then volunteered that he and a friend robbed a gas station last week. Then, after police arrested and warned him, right to silence, etc., and after he spoke at length with counsel, not me, he repeated his confession in an audio/video statement. He wasn't forced or coerced. He hadn't been detained for an unreasonable time in cells first. They hadn't even interrogated him. But, as a result of his confession, they were able to get a DNA warrant and matched him to blood swabbed at the scene. And the best part? The police had no idea beforehand that it was him. My client and his friend had covered part of their faces. The surveillance video was horrible quality, and they had used a spray irritant on the store clerk, a 16-year-old kid, immediately upon entering, so the kid hadn't been able to provide the police with, as description, beyond 2 males. And since he had no criminal record, he wasn't in the DNA database from previous crimes. He had just heard a rumor that police were investigating, and assumed they knew it was him. I had to laugh when I got the police report and read all of this. I then focused on securing him as fair plea deal because he had no chance at an acquittal. Story 15. Doctor admits to being a chest guy during sexual assault deposition. I've told this story here before, but it's a good one. My friend's mom was a defense lawyer for a hospital. Her job was to represent doctors accused of malpractice or anything relating to doctor/patient interaction. I forget all of the details, but she had one case where a female patient had accused a male doctor of sexual assault. The claim was that the doctor inappropriately touched the patient several times during a procedure. Allegedly, the doctor had been coached to say that during a routine procedure, it's possible that he had inadvertently brushed up against the patient's chest, and that if it happened, it was an unintentional consequence of following standard procedures. So they get to the deposition, and I guess the first question the doctor gets is something along the lines of, "Walk me through what happened," and the doctor says, "I don't know what you want me to say, man. I'm a chest guy. Always have been." They settled. Story 16. Client abandons other kids. Lies in court about parenting. I had a family client whose ex wasn't letting him see his kid. So we were in court with him, explaining how important parenting was to him, how much he loved being a father, etc. After 45 minutes of this, the mother says, "I don't know why he's saying this, he abandoned his other kids." Cue me, who has never heard him mention having other kids. Turned out, yeah, 100% abandoned them. Has had no contact for years, never made any efforts. Please give your lawyers important information, especially if another party involved knows your secrets. Story 17. Robber caught on camera, hides under bed with money in backpack. I had to try to defend a man who walked into a convenience store with a knife demanding money. He wore no masks, just his casual clothes, and walked through every aisle before he robbed it, being spotted by every security camera in the store. After the robbery, he ran back to the hotel he was staying at, also carrying an open backpack full of money. Being seen by the hotel's security cameras in the process, he then went into his room, threw the bag on the floor, and hid under a bed until police arrived. I spent a long night thinking about it before passing the case to somebody else, because I have no idea how to defend someone who has so much evidence against them. Story 18: Elderly couple loses life savings to Nigerian prince scam. Lawyer devastated. I went to a meeting where an older couple, 80s, sent their life saving to a Nigerian prince scam. They wanted to sue to get the money back. I had to explain that the money was gone forever, and there was no way to recover it. It was heartbreaking to see their devastation, but that's the reality of those scams. They had wired everything, believing it was an investment that would make them rich. Story 19: Stoned couple threatens Uber driver, lawyer intervenes in dispute. A divorced couple went to mediation to decide if it was appropriate to euthanize a 12-year-old Yorkie that was dying. It took 3 hours and nothing was decided. We discussed things like dignity of death, expected quality of life, and loss of consortium and companionship. We did not come to a decision, and the dog died 2 days later. Story 20: Family sues employer after worker dies running red light on bike to work. This wasn't me, but my dad, who is a workers' compensation lawyer. In Australia, the workers' compensation laws used to be absolutely stupid in favor of the worker. If you injured yourself on the way to work, somehow, the employer was responsible. So what happened was, this worker would cycle to work with colleagues every day. One morning he sets out to cycle, but gets stuck at a traffic light behind his friends, and they disappear into the hustle and bustle. In an attempt to catch up, he runs a red and gets hit by a car turning across the intersection. He dies, and his family sues the employer for damages. My dad's firm represents the company, which argues that the worker ran a red, so he died completely of his own merit. However, apparently the fact that he was on his way to work takes precedence, and his family receives $500,000 in damages from the employer, as well as the deceased's salary for the rest of his natural life expectancy should he have stayed alive. Absolute rort. Story 21: Couple breaks up after buying house. Male commits self-injury, wife calls. When I worked in residential real estate, we had a non-married couple that were buying a house, and everything was going smoothly. I reached out to them on a Friday, which was the last day of the attorney review and inspection period on their contract, to confirm that they wanted to move forward, since it was the last opportunity to back out and get their earnest money back. They wanted to move forward. First thing Monday morning, we get a call from their realtor saying that they had a fight over the weekend and broke up and want out of the contract. Obviously, I need to confirm this with the clients before we take any action that would put them in breach of the contract. I called the number on file, no answer. No response to the email I sent either. The next day, their realtor calls again and says the male half of the couple took his own life. It was his number and email address we had on file, so that explains the lack of response. We proceed to terminate the contract, despite some grumbling from the seller's side, since dead people can't buy property. Obviously, we thought that was the end of it. Then a week later, the male client's wife calls freaking out. Apparently, she had been completely unaware her husband had been trying to buy a house with another woman, and just caught wind of it now. She just wanted to be sure that she wouldn't be liable for anything her husband had done regarding this transaction. For an area of law that is normally pretty mundane, it was a lot of drama. Story 22: Wife plasters husband's explicit photos in garage for sheriff and mother to see. I was not prepared for both the amount and various genres of personal material I would be exposed to when I switched to family law. I do a little bit of everything: family, general, civil, lit, and criminal work. There are so many wild stories, but one of my favorites. A client of ours got caught cheating on his wife, and the separation became super messy, so my client had to have the sheriff escort him to the marital home to retrieve his belongings. The sheriff, my client, and his mother show up to get his things out the garage. Upon opening the garage, there were images of my client's explicit photos he had sent to his mistress posted everywhere. His wife literally printed hundreds of the photos and stuck them around the garage for the sheriff and his mother to see, while removing his stuff. Family law is wild. Story 23: Client wants to sue 7 demons harassing her. I worked as an intake specialist at a personal injury firm prior to transitioning into my legal assistant role. There was this inquiry I took where a lady wanted to sue the 7 demons harassing her. She had names for all the demons and stories for what each of them did. I wasn't allowed to end the call. Suffice to say we couldn't help her, but that was the most interestingly disturbing inquiry I've taken. Story 24. Crazy client demands lawyers yell at judge and takes over depositions. This one client wasn't really my problem, but she was a big problem to the attorneys. She would run over the associate attorneys, do her own legal research, and demand the attorneys to do things her way. If a judge denied a motion of ours, she wanted the attorneys to call the court and yell at the judge. She even tried to take over on a deposition and started asking her own questions to the witness. At another deposition, she apparently brought her own exhibits and wanted the attorney to use them, but he wouldn't. During that deposition, she kept shoving her own exhibits in front of the attorney and poking him. She called the court so much, one of the clerks actually called our office to complain and told us to make our clients stop calling. She's even tried to convince the partner attorney to represent her for free and said, "My case is huge. This one would definitely put you on the map and bring in more clients." She was going broke and the case was going downhill fast. She didn't want to settle either. She was so crazy and I was waiting for the day the firm would drop her. I left the firm before the case closed, so I don't know whatever happened to her. Story 25. Client forges doctor's note to skip court in forgery case. I had a guy charged with forgery. Original plea recommendation was for him to serve 3 years with 12 on probation. I get the serve time down to 90 days, in a county that has a policy that for every day you spend in jail, you get credit for 2. So the guy would only have to spend 45 days in jail total. Day before we go to plea, my client calls me and says that his gallbladder or something had erupted and he's going to need emergency surgery. I tell him to send me a doctor's note ASAP. He does. It had a doctor's office letterhead, a signature I couldn't read, so it had to be a real doctor, right? Wrong. The foolish person forged a doctor's note to get out of court for his forgery case. Needless to say, he no longer was going to only have to serve 45 days. That killed me. I had worked so hard to get that plea deal. That also taught me to never trust a client again. Well, trust, but verify. Story 26. Injunction against 80-year-old lady dancing naked and hanging plastic novelties. Filed for an injunction against an 80-year-old lady who kept dancing naked in her window in full view of her neighbors. Ended up in front of a stern, non-nonsense judge. The highlight of the hearing was when I said in addition to dancing naked, she has also hung several plastic novelties, or is it peenie? With significant girth, I might add. The judge screamed, "I've heard enough," and stormed off the bench. The stenographer was using a steno mask, which looks like an oxygen mask. She was laughing so hard and pressing the mask against her face with such force she was turning bright red. Story 27. Lawyer wins insurance for cigars lost in fires, then arrested for arson. Not a lawyer, but I've heard a story about a lawyer trying to win a competition. He decided to insure 24 Cuban cigars, smoke them, said he lost them in a series of small fires, and then make a claim against the insurance company. After the judge stated that the company didn't specify what counted as a fire, the company decided to avoid going through hefty lawful fees and gave the lawyer a settlement of £16,000. As the lawyer cashed his check, they had him arrested for 24 accounts of arson. Story 28. Beekeeper stung to death in truck rollover. Family claims work comp. Workers' compensation case representing the family of a deceased beekeeper. He had been transporting bees by truck from one orchard to another when he was in a rollover accident. He was trapped inside his truck and was stung to death. Story 29. Lawyer represents Uber driver against stoned couple refusing to pay. Ridiculous, not for me but for the accused. Here's the story. I was coming back from a wedding and booked myself an Uber share. The cab arrived and there was a couple, both clearly under the influence. As soon as I sat, They told me that the Uber driver was a jerk. He's taken forever to drop them to their destination. I asked the driver, he said he had to drop a previous passenger en route, and considering the traffic, the time taken was not unusual. Soon, the driver took the cab to their entered destination. The couple refused to get down and started abusing the driver, that it wasn't where they lived. The driver showed me the app that this is what they had entered as location, and he's following that. 30 minutes of further driving into nowhere, the couple had no idea where they lived, so they started abusing the driver again. Then, after 45 minutes, the driver asked them to alight and pay him his dues, since they themselves couldn't find where they had to go. The abuses got worse, and then they threatened the driver that they will anyway not pay him, since he had not dropped them where they lived. I lost it at this point. The driver was a simple, poor man. I told him to lock the car and drive to a nearby police station. They told the police that the Uber driver was harassing them, and that police shouldn't come in between the company, Uber, and them. Now, I told the police I was a lawyer, and a lawyer for the Uber driver now. I explained what had happened, and told him to register a police complaint. I said I was ready to depose the same before a local magistrate, and will see to it that the poor man gets his dues. Shocked the crap out of the couple. I told the police to do a blood test of the accused and informed them they were under the influence, which is illegal in our country. This made the couple get very scared. The police made them sit in the police van and told they'll be produced before the court the next day on various charges. Eventually, on insistence of the driver, I let them go. They apologized to the driver and me, paid his dues plus a healthy tip, and were allowed to go with a stern warning. The driver then dropped me to my place and refused to take money, saying that I had come as a god in his life. Little too much for me, I paid him nonetheless. He asked me what he could do to repay my debt. I told him, educate your children well and henceforth, take the money from your passengers first. He, being an old man that he was, gave me his blessings. Story 30. Client committed to mental hospital. Lawyer decides she should stay. I got a call from a woman saying she had been committed to a mental hospital and wanted out. I checked the rules and went to see her. Saw her paperwork, and I knew I could walk her out of there right then, and they couldn't stop us if they tried. Only thing is, by the time I read all her paperwork and chatted with her a bit about how she got there, I was pretty sure it was in her best interest she stay there. Story 29. Lawyer deals with client suing Best Buy for ruining daughter's belief in Santa. During law school, I was a member of a legal clinic. We represented low-income individuals under the supervision of a licensed attorney/professor. We handled family law issues, but would try to point clients in the right direction if we could not personally help them. One man came in and stated that he wanted to sue Best Buy, which is not uncommon, but why he wanted to sue Best Buy was different. See, this man said he purchased a refurbished computer from Best Buy for his daughter as a Christmas present. Best Buy had neglected to remove the previous owner's password screen, and thus, this man and his daughter were unable to access the computer until they took it back to Best Buy, which was understandably closed on Christmas Day. This, he said, caused his 12-year-old daughter to begin to question the very existence of Santa Claus. He and his daughter then argued the rest of the day, until finally he admitted to her that there was no Santa Claus. His words were, "Seeing your daughter lose faith in Santa ruined all Christmases to come." He also claimed that now his daughter was really difficult, since she had stopped believing in Santa Claus. What was more interesting is the amount of damages he requested. He stated he believed that Best Buy owed him at least 25 million inches because Christmas was ruined. His daughter will never believe in Santa again, and now he has to deal with her being knee-tapped now. I did not believe he had any type of recourse against Best Buy for inadvertently demolishing his daughter's belief in Santa, but even if I did, our clinic could not help him. I informed him that we only handled family law issues, and he should call the local bar association's lawyer referral service. He stated the bar association already told him they would not take his case, Then he proceeded to ask if I had children. I told him I did not. Then he proceeded to wish that all my future kids have their belief in Santa Claus ruined. He stated he would not help me if that happened. He then told me to, quote, get lost, and left. The whole time I was wondering how this guy's daughter believed in Santa Claus till age 12. Story 30. Client pours bleach on neighbor's tree and wants to sue for damages. When I was a trainee solicitor, my principal had a guy come in who spoke almost exclusively in quotes from United States presidents. This was a specialist law firm in a very English town, and the dude was about as English as it's possible to be. Tweed suit with leather elbow patches English. He wasn't initially anything to do with me, but half an hour into the initial meeting, my principal wandered into my office totally exasperated, which I'd never seen before, and she said, paraphrasing here, Alex, you're a patient man. Find out what this very eccentric person actually wants. It'll be a good first case evaluation for you to handle by yourself. I spent 2 hours listening to him talk. Literally every second sentence began with, as Woodrow Wilson once said, or as Grover Cleveland once said. He even managed to quote Taft. I mean, even the most eccentric people don't quote Taft. It's Taft, for goodness sake. Anyway, after 2 hours I explained how much the meeting was costing him even though I was just a trainee, and he visibly sagged and said, all blurted out like a naughty child, I poured bleach on the roots of my neighbor's tree and it fell into my greenhouse. Can you make him pay for the repairs? I gently explained why that wouldn't work, and he cried, so I called the loveliest secretary in the firm, who made him a cup of tea and sat with him until he went home. Story 31. Paralegal takes call from high client wanting to sue for self-defense stabbing necessity. Not lawyer, but paralegal. I took a cold call one evening from a gentleman who was clearly under the influence of a substance and homeless. He wanted to sue his local police dispatch, 911, paramedics, and a hospital. We are a civil litigation firm. Because he informed on someone who was now, allegedly, trying to get him. It was now the police station's fault that he would have to stab the guy in self-defense, and he wanted compensation for the emotional distress of having to do that. He rambled for over an hour about conspiracies involving the government tracking him through his teeth fillings, and how the hospital had implanted a chip during a previous visit. He insisted that if we didn't take the case, the aliens would come for him next. We politely declined and suggested mental health resources, but he hung up screaming about lawsuits against us too. Story 32. Unmarried woman files for divorce and alimony from boyfriend. Not really stupid, but unbelievable. My friend at work, his girlfriend filed for divorce a few weeks ago. That's right. They aren't married, and common law doesn't apply in Washington state. They lived together for 5 years. She has a job. She isn't on the mortgage. And she left him a few months ago. There are no kids involved. They were never engaged. In the divorce, she wants him to leave his house, and she wants to move back in. She wants him to pay her $2,800 a month for some reason. I referred him to my divorce attorney, and now that attorney is probably going to represent him. The woman's behavior was erratic. She has already tried to get a restraining order against him that was dismissed. Story 33. Client insists on reciting Yoruba poem for road accident claim. I dealt with a guy once who wanted me to take on his road traffic accident personal injury claim. He had written a poem in Yoruba about the accident. He refused to tell me anything about his case until he's read the whole thing in Yoruba. Among other problems, I can't speak any Yoruba at all. As in, not one word. As in, that day was the first time I had ever heard of the Yoruba language. I'm not even from a part of the world where I might readily be mistaken for someone who speaks Yoruba. It's a West African language, and I am really obviously not from a West African background. I try to explain this to the guy who becomes very agitated and insists that he must read out his poem in Yoruba. I give up and tell him to get on with it so we can talk about his claim. He does. It takes him nearly 20 minutes to finish. Anyway, after he's done, he finishes and sits back with a big smile and says that he's certain I'll take his case on now. I begin to ask him some questions about his case, but he refuses to answer. He says that this poem, in Yoruba, is everything I need to know about his case. Basically, I tell him to leave and stop wasting my time. He does, but not before standing around outside my office for an hour or so, reading out his poem, to no one in particular, over and over again, in Yoruba. Story 34. Man wants class action against underwear company for crooked anatomy. Without going into too many details, had a guy that wanted to bring a class action against the company that made his underwear because he was convinced his underwear was the reason he had a curvature in his anatomy. He assured us that as soon as the jury saw his condition, they'd side with him. No, we didn't take it. Story 35. Disturbed woman wants copyright protection for conspiracy manuscript. I was working in a law firm and got a call from reception advising that someone had arrived needing some intellectual property advice. I arrived at reception to find a clearly disturbed woman with a persistent facial twitch and a small wheeled suitcase. I took her to a conference room to discuss, making sure I kept a good line of sight to reception. She put the suitcase on the table and opened it to reveal a stack of thousands of handwritten pages and a single scissor blade. She explained that she had written a manuscript about how the city council gave her schizophrenia and hepatitis, aliens stole her pets, and that it was all part of a bigger conspiracy involving the army and the Illuminati. She was worried that our local newspaper was going to steal her thoughts and publish her manuscript without her consent, and wanted to register the copyright in her manuscript. We then had a perfectly rational and reasonable discussion about copyright laws. I explained that in our jurisdiction she didn't need to register it and that she had rights as an author automatically on creation of the work. I told her the most useful thing she could do would be to print a copy and mail it to herself by registered post, so that she had a sealed, dated record of the work. She was satisfied with this advice and left. Story 36. Lawyer handles case where father harms toddler with boiling water. Dependency case where a single father harmed his toddler with boiling water because he was crying about some silly toddler thing. The kid was severely burned. They were trying to reunify them. This is horrible, but unfortunately it's not uncommon. The burn pattern of being harmed with hot boiling water is taught to mandatory reporters because it happens with some frequency. It's hard to understand how it happens in a fit of rage because water takes time to heat and boil. It has to be somewhat premeditated. Truly horrific. The guy in this case claimed he was making dinner so there was water boiling already, and it happened in the heat of the moment. I thought that was nonsense. The pot was way larger than necessary to make a small meal, plus, this guy was not the sort to prepare home-cooked spaghetti. He was more of a slap some peanut butter on stale bread if he remembers to feed his son type of guy. Story 37. Sociopath in psych ward makes self-injury pacts without following through. A sociopath in a psych ward making self-injury pacts with vulnerable people and never following through. Charged with harm, determined he was too out of his mind to be accountable. Gonna be in an asylum for the next 2 decades unless something major changes within the case. There were implications like explicit supervision and whatnot. The whole predicament was a grayish area all in all. What else can you do? If he's deemed mentally incapable, he can't be sent to prison, so where else does he go? If you feel unsafe with your thoughts, please seek professional help. This video does not promote illegal activity.